The night was quiet in the tall glass tower of the city's richest company. The glowing skyline outside reflected in the glass walls, 1,000 lights scattered like stars across the sleeping city. Inside, the halls were silent, except for the steady hum of air conditioning and the distant ticking of a wall clock. Mr. Adrian Cole, the CEO of the empire, had stayed late after one of the most important business deals of his career. The conference room was empty now, files neatly stacked, glasses of untouched water still shining under the table lamps. His staff had long gone home. Adrian, however, preferred solitude. He liked the quiet that came after the chaos of meetings, numbers, and voices all demanding his attention. Carrying his leather briefcase, he walked down the marble hallway toward his private office. But halfway, something unusual caught his attention. A light, dim, faint, and oddly out of place. The corridor that led to the staff restroom should have been dark at this hour. Yet a small glow spilled out under the door, painting a thin line across the polished floor. Adrian stopped. It was late. Far too late for anyone to be inside. Security usually did rounds, and employees never lingered after hours unless asked to. His brow furrowed as his shoes clicked softly against the floor while he stepped closer. The silence grew heavier with each stride, and with it, a strange unease. When he reached the door, he paused. For a moment, he simply stared at that narrow stream of light. Something about it felt wrong, like an unspoken intrusion in his carefully controlled world. Slowly, he pushed the door open. The soft creak of the hinges echoed inside the restroom. His eyes adjusted to the dim glow of a single bulb hanging weakly from the ceiling. At first, everything appeared ordinary. The row of sinks, the mirrors reflecting his tall figure, the polished tiles. But then his gaze fell to the far corner. Adrian froze. There, against the cold wall, a figure sat slumped on the floor. A young woman dressed in a plain maid's uniform, her head tilted to the side, resting against the edge of the toilet. She was asleep. Her breathing was shallow, her chest rising and falling in slow rhythm. Strands of dark hair had fallen loose across her pale face. The uniform she wore was neat, but faded from countless washes. Her shoes, scuffed and worn, peeked out from beneath her folded legs. There was no mistaking it. She was not just resting. She was exhausted, completely overcome by fatigue. Adrian's first instinct was disbelief. This was his building, his company, his world. Cleaners came and went every day, but he had never once considered where they came from, or how hard they worked when no one was watching. Now one of them was here, asleep in a place no one should ever think of as a bed. He stepped closer, his footsteps echoing lightly across the tiled floor. With each step, the questions in his mind multiplied. Why was she here, sleeping in a restroom of all places? Did she not have a home to go to? Was she hiding from someone? For a man who spent his life solving business puzzles, this felt different. This wasn't numbers on a page. This was a life, a human story, dropped uninvited into his carefully ordered existence. Adrian crouched slightly, keeping a distance so as not to startle her. From this angle, he noticed the fine lines of exhaustion on her young face, the faint marks under her eyes, the way her hands were folded tightly together, even in sleep. He could almost sense the weight she carried, though he didn't yet know its name. He stood there for what felt like minutes, his heart oddly unsettled. He was used to power, wealth, respect, the kind that came with being at the top. But here in the silence of the restroom, facing a maid who had collapsed from sheer exhaustion, he felt something else, an uncomfortable pull of pity, of curiosity, of guilt he couldn't explain. The woman stirred suddenly, whispering something under her breath. Adrian froze, listening. The words were too soft to understand, just fragments of a dream. Her lips trembled as though she were pleading with someone unseen. His chest tightened at the sound. She shifted but did not wake. Adrian took a slow breath and straightened, his mind racing. Should he wake her? Call security? Or leave quietly, pretend he had never seen her? The last option tempted him for a second. After all, this wasn't his problem. He was a CEO, not a caretaker. But his eyes lingered on her face, on the clear evidence of struggle etched there, and he knew he couldn't simply turn away. The silence pressed in heavier now. The air in the restroom felt colder, tighter, as though the walls themselves held the weight of her secret. Adrian's thoughts swirled. He had built his life on control, yet here was something raw, something real that he couldn't ignore. Finally, he stepped back toward the door, his hand resting on the polished handle. He looked at her one last time. She looked fragile but not weak. There was strength hidden in the way she sat, as though sleep was her only escape from the battles she fought when awake. Adrian whispered to himself, "Who are you?" The question echoed in the empty restroom unanswered. But deep inside, Adrian knew this was not the last time he would seek that answer. For the first time in years, a sense of suspense, unlike any business risk or market gamble, settled into his chest. The maid sleeping on the restroom floor was no longer just a stranger. She was the start of something he could not yet name, but he already knew. His life would not be the same. Adrian felt a strange tightness in his chest, a mix of shock and pity he could not easily explain. A millionaire CEO had seen many things in life: luxury hotels, private islands, boardrooms where fortunes were made in a single handshake, but never this. Never a maid, asleep on the cold tiles of a restroom, her head resting against a toilet as though it were a pillow. The sight unsettled him in ways he had not expected. He stood silently, his eyes studying the woman in the dim light. She could not have been more than her early 20s. Her face, though pale and weary, carried a kind of quiet grace. Strands of hair fell across her forehead, and he noticed the faint sheen of sweat at her temple. As though exhaustion had claimed her after endless hours of work, she stirred slightly in her sleep, whispering something that he could not quite make out. Her lips moved gently, and Adrian leaned forward without realizing it, straining to hear. The words were broken, half swallowed by the fog of dreams, but they carried the tone of pleading. It was not the mumble of someone lost in a carefree dream. It was the voice of someone burdened, someone begging silently even in their sleep. Her hands, folded tightly against her chest, caught his attention. They were rough, the skin dry and marked with tiny cuts, the kind that came from long hours of scrubbing floors, lifting buckets, wiping surfaces until they shone. These were not the hands of leisure or comfort. These were the hands of survival. Adrian shifted uneasily. For years his life had been about control of markets, of people, of outcomes. He thrived on the certainty that money brought, the doors it opened, the power it gave him. But in this moment, looking at a maid asleep in a place where no one should rest, he felt powerless. He wondered what her story was. Why was she here, asleep in this humiliating corner? Did she have nowhere else to go? Was she hiding from something? Or was this simply the reality of her life? Work until your body gives in, then sleep wherever you fall. His throat tightened with something unfamiliar. Sympathy was not a language Adrian often spoke. In the corporate world, weakness was hidden, polished away, turned into a performance of strength. Yet here was weakness laid bare, so unguarded and raw that it made him uncomfortable just to witness it. He stayed there, watching her breathe, as the seconds stretched into minutes. Each sound in the restroom seemed louder now. The hum of the light, the faint drip of a faucet, the gentle rhythm of her breathing. And all the while, questions crowded his mind. Should he wake her? Would she panic, realizing the CEO himself had found her in this state? Or should he leave quietly, pretend he had never seen her, and let her rest until she woke naturally? Both choices felt wrong. Waking her might bring her fear. Walking away might feel like abandonment. His gaze fell once more to her face. Even in sleep, there was tension there, as though life never allowed her to fully relax. The kind of tension that came from carrying too much for too long. He had seen executives under pressure before, but this was different. This was not the weight of money or ambition. This was survival etched into her expression. For the first time in years, Adrian hesitated. He, the man known for making decisions quickly and firmly, stood paralyzed by the sight of a single maid. And in that hesitation, he felt something stir within him, a quiet, unexplainable pull that had nothing to do with logic. The woman moved again. This time her head shifted, her cheek pressing against the cold porcelain of the toilet. Adrian winced at the thought. The restroom was clean, of course, it always was, but still it was no place for rest. It spoke volumes about her exhaustion, about how far her strength had been pushed. Adrian found himself whispering without meaning to, his voice barely audible. "What brought you here?" The words vanished into the still air, met only by her steady breathing. He almost expected an answer, though he knew none would come. He straightened slowly, his eyes still fixed on her. There was something about her presence that disturbed the careful order of his world. He had built his empire on distance, distance from the struggles of ordinary people. And yet in this small, quiet corner of his building, that distance had collapsed in an instant. The stillness of the restroom broke suddenly. The young maid stirred again, this time more sharply. Her eyelids fluttered, her lips parting as she took a shallow breath. Slowly her eyes opened, adjusting to the dim glow above her. For a second she looked lost, confused, as though waking from a deep dream she did not want to leave. Then she saw him, her entire body jolted upright. She gasped, her hands flying to her face as if she could hide her shame. Her wide, dark eyes fixed on the tall man standing only a few feet away. His sharp suit, the expensive watch glinting faintly under the light. She knew instantly who he was. The CEO, the man whose name was spoken in the halls with both respect and fear. "Sir, I'm sorry," she stammered, her voice trembling. She scrambled to her feet so quickly she almost stumbled. Her knees shook, her hands twisted nervously in front of her. "Please forgive me. I didn't mean to. I must have—" Her words tumbled out in panic, each sentence tripping over the next. Adrian raised a hand gently, not in anger but to calm her. "It's all right," he said softly. His voice was steady, calm, though inside he still felt that unsettling twist in his chest. The maid lowered her eyes, too ashamed to meet his. She wrung her hands together, trying to think of an excuse, anything that might save her from being dismissed on the spot. She imagined the worst, that tomorrow her name would be struck off the payroll, that she would have no job to return to. And without this job, how would she take care of her brother? "I was just," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I was just tired. I'm so sorry. Please don't report me. I'll work harder, I swear. I didn't mean to disrespect your building." Adrian studied her carefully. Her words carried no pretense, no attempt to twist the truth. They were raw, desperate, and painfully honest. He could see the fear in her trembling shoulders, hear it in the way her breath shook with every word. He took a small step closer, careful not to frighten her further. "I'm not here to punish you," he said, "but I need to know. Why were you sleeping here?" She hesitated, her lips pressed tightly together. The truth was heavy, sitting at the edge of her tongue. She feared speaking it. Would he understand? Or would he mock her struggles the way others sometimes did? Adrian's gaze softened. He was not barking questions like a superior. He was asking quietly, almost as though he cared. That alone unsettled her more than anger would have. Her chest rose and fell as she fought to steady her breathing. Finally she whispered, I didn't have the strength to go home tonight. I finished late, too late. I thought I'd close my eyes for just a moment and—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "I didn't mean for you to find me like this." Her voice cracked on the last word. Shame burned in her cheeks, and she lowered her head, unable to face him. Adrian's eyes lingered on her. Her uniform was clean but worn thin at the sleeves. Her shoes were frayed at the edges. She carried no purse, no belongings, nothing that spoke of comfort or stability. Everything about her screamed of a life stretched thin by hardship. "What's your name?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. She lifted her gaze slightly, her brows furrowed. Few people in the building had ever asked her that. Most passed her by as though she were invisible, a shadow in the corner of their busy lives. "Elena," she said softly. "My name is Elena." Adrian repeated it in his mind. Elena, a simple name, yet it seemed to carry weight now, tied forever to the image of her asleep in the restroom. "Elena," he said aloud, testing the sound of it. His voice was calm, steady, but his eyes still carried questions. "You shouldn't have to sleep here. You know that, don't you?" Her lips trembled as she tried to answer. "I know," she whispered, "but sometimes life doesn't leave me with a choice." Silence settled between them, thick and unyielding. Adrian felt it pressing against him, demanding answers he could not yet give. He had come into this restroom expecting only silence. Instead, he had found a woman whose very existence posed questions he had never thought to ask. Elena fidgeted, unsure what to do. Part of her wanted to flee, to escape the piercing gaze of the man who held her livelihood in his hands. Another part of her, small but undeniable, was strangely grateful that he had not shouted, had not humiliated her, had not ordered her out. She lowered her head again, whispering, "Please, sir, don't fire me. I'll never let this happen again." Adrian looked at her, really looked at her. The fear in her voice, the raw honesty in her eyes, it unsettled him more than any lie could have. He had built his life on power, on making men tremble in negotiation rooms. But here was a woman trembling not from greed or ambition, but from sheer survival, and for reasons he could not yet understand. Adrian knew he could not simply walk away, go home. "Elena," he said finally, his tone firm but not unkind, "get some rest. We'll talk later." Her eyes widened slightly in shock. She hadn't expected mercy, not from him. For a moment she searched his face, trying to read the truth in his words. Then she nodded quickly, whispering, "Thank you, sir. Thank you." She gathered herself, bowed her head, and hurried past him toward the door. Adrian watched her leave, her small figure retreating into the dim hallway until she was gone. The restroom was quiet again. But Adrian knew the silence had changed. The image of Elena would not leave him now. The question still lingered, heavy and unrelenting. Why had life driven her here? And why did he, Adrian Cole, the man who had everything, suddenly feel as though he were the one who had been discovered? Adrian studied her carefully. Her words carried no arrogance, no excuse, only raw desperation. For years he had been surrounded by people who spoke with masks on, polished speeches, hidden motives, carefully chosen lies. But this young maid had none of that. Her fear, her shame, and her honesty lay bare in every trembling syllable. For a moment Adrian did not reply. He simply watched her, noting how her shoulders shook slightly, how she bit her lip as if bracing for a blow. When he finally spoke, his tone was quieter than even he expected. "Why were you here, Eleanor? Truly, tell me." The question made her stiffen. Her gaze dropped to the floor, her hands twisting at the hem of her uniform. She hesitated for a long time, as though debating whether the truth was worth the risk. Then, with a trembling exhale, she began. "I finish late most nights," she said softly. "Sometimes midnight, sometimes later. I clean every floor, every office, until the glass shines, until there's nothing left for anyone to complain about. By the time I'm done, buses don't run anymore. Taxis cost more than what I earn in 2 hours. And," she paused, her throat tightening, "I don't have anyone waiting for me at home." Adrian frowned slightly. "You don't live with family?" Eleanor shook her head, her dark hair brushing her cheeks. "Not exactly. I rent a room, one room for myself and my younger brother. He's 17, but he's sick. He can't work! Some nights, when the medicine runs out, I stay even longer, scrubbing floors no one will notice, just so I can earn a little more. By the time I leave, my body—" She looked away, ashamed. "My body doesn't listen anymore. Tonight I thought I'd close my eyes for a few minutes. I didn't mean to sleep so deeply." Her voice wavered at the edges, each word a thread pulled tight by exhaustion. She clasped her hands together, afraid her confession might sound like weakness. Adrian felt the weight of her words settle in his chest. For the first time in years, he found himself at a loss. He had sat across from billionaires and politicians, negotiated with men who would crush others for a profit margin. But never had he felt so disarmed by something so simple, the truth of a maid's exhaustion. "And your brother?" Adrian asked after a pause. "What's wrong with him?" Her eyes flickered with pain. "His lungs. It's hard for him to breathe some days. He needs medicine often, but it's expensive. Too expensive. I try to cover everything. Rent, food, medicine with this job. But no matter how hard I work, it's never enough." Her voice cracked at the last word. She blinked rapidly, willing back the tears that threatened to fall. She would not cry. Not in front of him. Not in front of the man who could decide her future with a single command. Adrian's hand twitched slightly at his side. He was not a man used to comforting others. Sympathy had never been part of his world. Yet in this moment, watching Elena fight to keep her dignity even as she revealed her pain, he felt something stir, something he had long forgotten. Elena straightened her shoulders, as though forcing herself to be strong before him. "I'm sorry, sir. I shouldn't have said all that. It's not your concern. Please forget it." But Adrian could not forget it. Her words lingered in his mind like a stubborn echo. He looked at her hands again, scarred from work, trembling as she tried to hold herself together, and he realized that this maid, whom most people would never notice, carried battles greater than many men in his boardroom ever had. "You shouldn't have to live like that," Adrian said quietly. The softness of his voice startled her. She looked up at him, her wide eyes filled with uncertainty. "With respect, sir, People like me don't get to choose how we live. We survive. That's all. Her words cut deep, sharper than she knew. For Adrian, who had always lived in abundance, the idea of surviving instead of living was foreign. And yet, hearing it from her lips, it rang with a truth that silenced him. For a long moment, the two of them stood there in the dim light, the silence heavy with unspoken thoughts. That night, long after Elena had left the building, Adrian Cole remained awake. He sat alone in his penthouse apartment, the city lights sprawling beneath him like rivers of gold. Normally, this view gave him comfort. It was a reminder of everything he had built, everything he controlled. But tonight, the glittering skyline seemed strangely hollow. His mind replayed the image over and over. Elena slumped against the cold tiles, her face pale with exhaustion, her whispering voice begging him not to fire her. He could not forget the trembling in her hands, nor the quiet courage in the way she finally confessed her struggles. Adrian poured himself a glass of whiskey, but even the warmth of it could not steady him. He leaned back against the leather chair, staring blankly at the ceiling. For years his life had been measured by numbers, profits, margins, the rise and fall of stock values. A life built on contracts and calculations, but Eleanor's words echoed louder than any financial report. Sometimes life doesn't leave me with a choice. We survive. That's all. Survive. The word gnawed at him. He had never thought of life in terms of survival. For him, choices had always existed. Where to invest, whom to trust, what luxury to purchase next. Survival was for others, for people far below the glass floors of his tower. And yet for Elena, survival was the only measure of her days. Adrian rose and walked to the wide glass window, pressing a hand against the cold surface. The city looked alive, but behind those lights, how many stories were like hers? How many faces did he pass each day without seeing them at all? For the first time in years he felt small. He remembered her voice when she spoke of her brother, how her eyes darkened with fear at the thought of losing him. That fear had been more honest than anything he had seen in boardrooms. Executives faked confidence, hid their anxieties behind polished words. Eleanor had no such shield. She carried her truth openly, painfully, and it shook him in ways he could not explain. Adrian sat again, but he could not relax. His heart kept circling the same question. Why did it matter to him? He had seen poverty before in reports, in charity functions, in passing, but never like this. Never so close. Never in his own building, in his own restroom. Maybe it was the way she refused to ask for pity. She had spoken only facts, stripped bare of drama. Her exhaustion had been real. Her fear had been real, and behind it, her strength had been undeniable. She carried the weight of two lives, hers and her brother's, and she still stood tall enough to apologize, to protect her dignity. Adrian thought of his own life. His wealth, his empire, his power. He had worked hard, yes, but he had also inherited doors already half open. He had never faced the crushing silence of survival. His world had always given him choices. The more he compared their realities, the more uneasy he felt. He tried to push the thoughts aside, focusing instead on upcoming deals, contracts waiting for his approval. But every time his eyes landed on the neat stack of papers on his desk, he saw Elena's face, her wide, frightened eyes. The quiet tremble in her voice. He rubbed his temples. Why did it matter? She was just a maid. Thousands worked in his buildings. He wasn't responsible for their lives outside of work. That was not his burden. And yet deep down he knew he could not ignore her. Something about her had left a mark. It was not love, not yet. It was something more raw, more unsettling. It was the realization that for all his wealth and power, he had overlooked what truly mattered. He poured himself another drink, but left it untouched. The silence of his penthouse pressed in on him, louder than any crowd. He had everything, yet he felt emptier than he had in years. Eleanor, with nothing, had carried a strength that put his own to shame. Adrian leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Why can't I stop thinking about her?" he muttered to himself. The question lingered in the air unanswered, but he knew deep inside that Eleanor had shifted something in him. A door had opened, one he had never dared touch before. Behind it lay questions about his life, his choices and his purpose. Questions that scared him more than any business risk ever had. That night, as the city slept, Adrian sat awake in his glass tower, haunted not by losses or failures, but by the memory of a maid asleep in a restroom. And though he would not yet admit it, his world had already begun to change. That night, long after Elena had left the building, Adrian Cole remained awake. He sat alone in his penthouse apartment, the city lights sprawling beneath him like rivers of gold. Normally this view gave him comfort. It was a reminder of everything he had built, everything he controlled. But tonight, the glittering skyline seemed strangely hollow. His mind replayed the image over and over. Elena slumped against the cold tiles, her face pale with exhaustion, her whispering voice begging him not to fire her. He could not forget the trembling in her hands, nor the quiet courage in the way she finally confessed her struggles. Adrian poured himself a glass of whiskey, but even the warmth of it could not steady him. He leaned back against the leather chair, staring blankly at the ceiling. For years his life had been measured by numbers, profits, margins, the rise and fall of stock values. A life built on contracts and calculations, but Eleanor's words echoed louder than any financial report. Sometimes life doesn't leave me with a choice. We survive, that's all. Survive. The word gnawed at him. He had never thought of life in terms of survival. For him, choices had always existed. Where to invest, whom to trust, what luxury to purchase next. Survival was for others, for people far below the glass floors of his tower. And yet for Elena, survival was the only measure of her days. Adrian rose and walked to the wide glass window, pressing a hand against the cold surface. The city looked alive, but behind those lights, how many stories were like hers? How many faces did he pass each day without seeing them at all? For the first time in years he felt small. He remembered her voice when she spoke of her brother, how her eyes darkened with fear at the thought of losing him. That fear had been more honest than anything he had seen in boardrooms. Executives faked confidence, hid their anxieties behind polished words. Eleanor had no such shield. She carried her truth openly, painfully, and it shook him in ways he could not explain. Adrian sat again, but he could not relax. His heart kept circling the same question. Why did it matter to him? He had seen poverty before in reports, in charity functions, in passing, but never like this. Never so close. Never in his own building, in his own restroom. Maybe it was the way she refused to ask for pity. She had spoken only facts, stripped bare of drama. Her exhaustion had been real. Her fear had been real, and behind it, her strength had been undeniable. She carried the weight of two lives, hers and her brother's, and she still stood tall enough to apologize, to protect her dignity. Adrian thought of his own life. His wealth, his empire, his power. He had worked hard, yes, but he had also inherited doors already half open. He had never faced the crushing silence of survival. His world had always given him choices. The more he compared their realities, the more uneasy he felt. He tried to push the thoughts aside, focusing instead on upcoming deals, contracts waiting for his approval. But every time his eyes landed on the neat stack of papers on his desk, he saw Elena's face, her wide, frightened eyes. The quiet tremble in her voice. He rubbed his temples. Why did it matter? She was just a maid. Thousands worked in his buildings. He wasn't responsible for their lives outside of work. That was not his burden, and yet deep down he knew he could not ignore her. Something about her had left a mark. It was not love, not yet. It was something more raw, more unsettling. It was the realization that for all his wealth and power, he had overlooked what truly mattered. He poured himself another drink, but left it untouched. The silence of his penthouse pressed in on him, louder than any crowd. He had everything, yet he felt emptier than he had in years. Eleanor, with nothing, had carried a strength that put his own to shame. Adrian leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Why can't I stop thinking about her?" he muttered to himself. The question lingered in the air unanswered, but he knew deep inside that Eleanor had shifted something in him. A door had opened, one he had never dared touch before. Behind it lay questions about his life, his choices and his purpose. Questions that scared him more than any business risk ever had. That night, as the city slept, Adrian sat awake in his glass tower, haunted not by losses or failures, but by the memory of a maid asleep in a restroom. And though he would not yet admit it, his world had already begun to change. Weeks passed, and something quiet but powerful began to unfold in the glass tower. Adrian Cole, once known for his sharp edges and cold efficiency, started changing. His staff noticed it first. He lingered longer in conversations, asked questions he never used to ask, and listened more than he spoke. The aura of untouchable authority softened, just slightly, but enough for people to whisper. And always, somewhere in the background was Elena. She continued her work diligently, never expecting anything from him, never daring to dream beyond her duties. Yet each time their paths crossed, Adrian found himself stopping. Sometimes it was just a simple greeting, other times a question about her brother, Daniel. Each small exchange carved away the invisible walls between them. Then one late evening the moment came. Adrian had just finished a long meeting with investors. His office was quiet, the city glowing outside like a million flickering stars. He was about to leave when he noticed movement through the glass walls. Elena was there again, quietly polishing the floor, her hands tired but steady. He watched her for a long time before stepping out. "Elena," she straightened, startled, her cheeks flushing. "Sir, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disturb." "You're not disturbing anything," Adrian said gently. He paused, then added, "Come into my office for a moment." Her instinct was to refuse. Every part of her warned that this was too much, too strange. But something in his tone, so different from the cold command she had once feared, made her nod slowly. Inside, she stood nervously by the door while Adrian moved behind his desk. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a slim folder. "This," he said, sliding it across the desk, "is a scholarship application. It's for a private academy that partners with engineering programs. If your brother is as talented as you say, this could change his life." Elena's breath caught. Her trembling hands touched the folder but did not open it. I don't understand." Adrian leaned forward, his voice steady. "I spoke with a few contacts. I can't guarantee admission, but I can guarantee he'll be seen. He'll have a chance." Her eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. Why would you do this for us?" For a moment, Adrian did not answer. He looked at her, really looked at her, and the truth pressed against his chest. "Because you opened my eyes. You made me see what I've been blind to for years. I thought success was only about numbers, power, control, but you showed me that real strength is surviving every day with dignity. And I can't ignore that anymore." Tears slipped down Elena's cheeks, despite her effort to stay composed. She had imagined many endings for her life: failure, exhaustion, sacrifice, but never this. A powerful man not offering pity, but recognition. Adrian stood, moving around the desk until he was only a few feet from her. His voice softened even more. "Elena, I don't want you to keep sleeping in restrooms. I don't want you to keep carrying everything alone. You deserve better. And so does your brother." Her heart pounded. The words were too much, too generous. Part of her wanted to step back, to guard herself from the impossible hope rising inside. But another part, the part that had long been silent, whispered that maybe this was the change she had prayed for. "Sir," she began, but her voice broke. She tried again. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to," Adrian said softly. "Just promise me one thing. Never stop believing your story matters." At that, Elena broke. A quiet sob escaped her lips, and she quickly covered her face. Adrian did not move closer. He only waited, letting her have her moment. When she finally lowered her hands, her eyes red but shining, she whispered, "Thank you. Not for the papers. For seeing me." Adrian nodded, his throat tight with emotions he wasn't used to. That night, as Elena left the office, clutching the folder to her chest, Adrian stood by the window once more. But this time, the city below looked different. The lights didn't feel hollow anymore. They felt alive, filled with stories like Elena's, stories he had ignored for too long. And for the first time in years, Adrian Cole smiled. Not the practiced smile of a CEO, but the genuine, quiet smile of a man who had finally discovered something greater than wealth. Because in that restroom weeks ago, he had thought he had found a sleeping maid, but in truth, he had found something else entirely. A reminder of humanity, a spark of compassion, and perhaps the beginning of a love he had never believed possible. It was in that moment, watching her disappear into the night with hope in her hands, that Adrian knew his life had changed forever.